I've designed a basic class here for a sorceress, and the sorceress has three fields, much like what we've done in class. It has a position made up of an X and a Y position and a direction. So those are the things the sorceress has. Then I've written two methods. I've written a move forward method and a turn method. And the reason I've written these two methods is because this is how, as the developer, I want to interact with the sorceress. I want to change the position by moving, and I want to change the direction by turning. These two methods can contain complicated code. In this case, in the case of the move forward method, we've used all sorts of complicated maths, which doesn't matter, to move that distance in whatever direction we're facing. And in the case of the turn method, we're allowing the user to pass in, the consumer of the class to pass in the number of degrees, but internally we're working with radians, so I needed to do a conversion here. Again, this is not important. What's important is how I interact with the sorceress. I only have two options, move forward and turn. And remember, I said, as the programmer, that's how I want people to interact with the sorceress. I don't want them to have to know what maths is being involved. I just want them to know that those are the two ways that they can interact with the sorceress. Next, I created a game class. And the game class has as its field a single sorceress, who I've named player. So the player is a sorceress, and the game has a sorceress, which is the player. And there's four things we can do that the game caters for. It can handle what happens when we press the W key, so we're using the WASD keys to move our sorceress around in the world. And you can see that in the on W key pressed method, I am calling the move forward method and moving the sorceress forward 20 units. When I press the backwards key, the S key, she moves backwards, or she moves forwards a negative amount. Here I've made it that she moves backwards a bit slower than she moves forwards. And similarly, the turn methods, depending on whether you're pressing A or D, turn a negative amount or a positive amount. So the game is now interacting with the sorceress, called player, in the way that the programmer, who happens to also be me, of the sorceress class intended. When I wrote the sorceress class, I intended for people to interact with the sorceress through the move forward methods and through the turn method, not other means. And the game class is doing that. It's calling move forward and it's calling turn, and that's how it's interacting with the sorcerer. However, often you will work with multiple developers on the same project, and it's possible for, let's say, there was a different developer working on the game class to the developer who worked on the sorceress class. It's possible for that developer to interact with your sorceress in a way you didn't intend. For example, here when I move forward, let's say that the developer of the game class decided to rather change the X position himself, like so. Okay, so when the W key is pressed, he's going to change the X position. And here he's directly accessing that POSX field of the sorcerer class, which is not what we intended. We intended that if you want to change the X position and the Y position, you needed to use the move forward method. So how do we prevent the developer working on the game class from cheating like this? As a side note, it's not always two developers. Often when our projects start to get bigger and we have more and more classes, we as a single developer might forget how we coded a certain class, what our original intentions were, and we might forget, and we might start making mistakes if the rules are not clear about how we should be interacting with our classes. So now I need to be clear as a developer how I can prevent people outside of this class, like the game class, from directly manipulating these fields. I only want them to be able to call move forward and turn. To prevent this, I'm going to add a special keyword in front of my three fields. And it's the opposite to this keyword. So I'm going to put in front of my three fields, I'm going to put the word private. Save that. And you'll see when I come across to this class, it's underlined in red, and it won't compile any longer. So I have correctly denied the game class from adding to that field. Out of interest, if I don't have the word private in front of something, it's by default public. So even if for methods, if I do that, if I take out the word public, it's by default public. So it's the same thing. But I like to always specify which things should be available to another class and which things should not be available to other classes. I'm defining the rules of how we interact with the sorceress. So let's correct our onKeyPressed method. Again, now I'm forced to use the move forward method and pass in the amount that I'd like to move forward. To recap, adding private has prevented the player class from directly editing these three fields. In order to change the values of those fields, they have to use the things that are public. Let's say I wanted to create a method called display. Which prints out where the sorceress is in the world. So I'd use something like system.out.println, and then I would have, perhaps I'm going to do the X position. And the player's Y position. Now, I'm sure you can see a problem already. Both posX and posY are underlined in red. And that's because, well, they're private. This time I'm not trying to edit their values. I'm trying to get their values and display them on the screen. So private hasn't only made the variable, hasn't only prevented one from editing the variable, it's prevented one from even getting the value of the variable or having any direct interaction with these variables at all. So how, as a developer, can I prevent these fields from being edited but allow them from being read? And there's a little trick that we use. We create what we call getter methods. Now in NetBeans has a shortcut that allows us to add them in automatically. And for that we use the Alt Insert shortcut that pops up our little menu, and we're going to choose getters. Now I'm going to choose getters for all three of my fields, and I'm going to click generate. Okay. And these three methods now, they will allow us to see they're all public. Because these three methods are public, we can use them from the game class. So let's replace our posX over here in the game class, which we're not allowed to directly access, and replace it with the getPosX method, a call to that method. Now that method is public, which means I am allowed to call it. And what does it do? Well, it's going to give me and return as a special keyword, which means it's going to, when the game class calls this method, the sorceress class will return that value back to the game class. And because the method is public, we can access this posX field indirectly through this getPosX method. And finally here, we can call getPosY. In simple terms, what we've done is from the game class's perspective, we've made the X position read only.